Seeing is believing. I think you'll agree. Hello and welcome back to Small Soldier. I hope you're all safe and well.
Just stay at home.
If this is your first time here and you're interested in military modeling, please consider subscribing and hit the bell notification below so you never miss an episode. By doing this, it really helps to promote and grow my channel.
I love you guys.
And this helps me out a lot. In this video, I'll show you how I paint eyes on my figures, and I'll be doing this by using 4 scale examples: 54mm, 1/16 scale, 1/10 scale, and 1/4 scale. I'd like to thank Charlie Robson for lending me the 1/4 scale bust. And if you're interested in that figure, I'll leave a link below in the description where you can purchase it. First off, let's investigate what makes an eye lifelike.
Be a moron, an imbecile, like the dumbest mother that ever lived. Everybody knows you never go full retard.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Small Soldier video. First off, I'd like to wish you all the very best, and I hope you're all staying healthy and safe and staying indoors. I'd like to think this won't last forever and we'll be back to normal real soon. And as modelers, we've been preparing for this for a long time. I don't think we have any problem secluding ourselves and staying at home. And these are some basic colors I'm mixing up. Red, a dark brown, black, and blues. Depending on the scale of the figure, you will be able to put less detail into a smaller subject than into a larger subject. And a lot of that detail will be determined on the sculpt of the figure, whether it's a good sculpt or a bad sculpt. So I would suggest getting the best figures that you can afford. This will just make it a lot easier for you, especially painting eyes. I don't want to turn this into a how to paint figures fully tutorial, but I thought for this little 54mm, I thought I should just bump some things up and add some shadows and highlights, just to give you a better idea of how eyes should look in this scale. Not my greatest work, but I think you get the idea of how to paint eyes in 54mm from what I've shown you here. And again, crappy sculpt just leaves me uninspired. So again, I start with the upper eyelid. You want to get that established first before you start painting in your pupils. And pupils at this scale aren't just a big circle. You want to make sure you're covering up part of that pupil with the upper eyelid. So it's really only maybe a half or 3/4 moon that you're going to show from the bottom up. And again, remember to make those eyeballs the same size and looking in the right direction. If you're having trouble painting on the other side of the nose with your opposite hand, sometimes I find it easy to flip it and paint upside down. And it would have been nice to show you that, but I lost that footage. Next up is the lower eyelid. And to do this, I'll use a red or a very watered down darker burgundy to create that look. Never use black to do that lower outline on the eyelid, or your figure will look like it's wearing makeup. And the final step is to add the catch light, which will give your figure's eyes life. For me, it's always easiest to start with that upper eyelid. I find it gives me a good anchor point for where to start to place the pupils. Next, I'm drawing in the lower eyelid, and you can see from the photographs to the left here that the lower eyelid never has a dark line. You'll see it's always pinkish hue or lighter in tone, and that just helps things look more natural. Once I get that lower line in, then I'm going to paint the iris, and that's the blue or colored portion of your eye. And you can see here I've used a light bluish gray to achieve that. Another thing, once we're painting in 1/10 scale or sometimes 1/16 scale, but for the most part larger scales, you're going to be able to put a lot more detail into those eyes than you would in smaller scales. And this could include adding all the shadows below the eyelids, the shadows around the ball of the eye, the iris, which is the colored part, your pupil, catch lights, your reds, even getting to the point of adding veiny, kind of bloody looking eyes, or bloodshot eyes in some cases. Once the iris is painted, I'll go in and start adding a darker line around the outside of the iris, which implies the colored portion as it goes into shadow. And I'll do that by just slowly building up thin layers of color until I achieve the results I'm looking for. The next step is to start shading the eye, and I do that again with very thin glazes of color, and I keep building those up layer upon layer until I achieve the proper depth. And once I get the darks in, I start adding more light, and here you'll see I'm adding a lighter tone of blue to the lower third of the eye, and you can see there that really starts to make the eye look lifelike. Achieving realism in miniature painting is really all about your light and your shadow. If you don't have light, you don't have shadow, and vice versa. So always try to push the contrast as much as possible. And with practice over time, I guarantee that you will have good results in the end. Now at this scale here and larger, you really get to test your skills and add in a ton of detail. At this scale, you're able to start adding in tiny vein lines or more detail into the areas around the tear ducts and the lower eyelids. You can really start pushing in your shadows and your highlights. And you'll see that once we get going on this figure here. At a larger scale like this, you really have to make sure that your eyeballs are pretty straight and they're definitely looking in the same direction from one side to the other. Once the irises are painted in roughly where I want them, I'll add a little white to the bottom of the eyelid here just to brighten it up a little bit in preparation for the pinkish hues and tones I'll be adding later on. Again, with this head, because it's such a large scale, I thought I would go in and add some tones to the face just so that the eyes have something to work against as far as the contrast goes. And, well, you'll get to kind of see the way I would paint a face in acrylics in sort of a wet in wet technique. I don't do the whole thing here, but you get a rough idea of the way I would paint a face, possibly even an underpainting in preparation for the oil paint later on. And not to worry, I do have a full figure painting tutorial coming up soon. That's the Rommel bust that I've been posting pictures of, and many of you might have seen that. I'm still working on that, but that will be the next video up on my channel. I thought I needed to get this one out of the way though, because I have had several people comment that they wanted to see a video on how to paint eyes, and I know it's something that's seriously lacking on YouTube, so I thought I would get that one out of the way first. I did the rest off camera, and as you can see here, that's sort of where I took it to, and it's not nearly finished at all, but by adding the skin tones, it'll give you a better idea of what you can achieve and how the eyes can look against a painted face. Here I decided to use a little bit of oil paint. I thought that might be a little easier to control at this scale, and I think it worked out pretty good in the end. So, like the caption said, it was Terra Rosa that I used, and it's just a matter of going in and laying the color in and then blending it back out. And I'm using a lot of thinner here. It's very thin, a very thin glaze, so that oil paint dries up pretty quick. And remember, this process is really all about the layers.
Layers! Layers! Oh.
And you can see as I'm building up all those layers of reds and pinks, I'm really getting a very realistic looking eye here. And like I said earlier, having a good sculpt, and this is a great sculpt, it really makes painting eyes a pleasure and a lot easier. Now I'm adding a little lighter brown into the iris area here just to build up those highlights again. And up top I've added in the dark, very dark, it's a very dark brown, not black, that I'm using here for the upper eyelid. And then reinforcing some of the wrinkles and the deep crevices in the bottom of the eye. At this scale you can even go as far as painting in the small lines in the iris. This is where you can really go to town on all the extra detail painting. And if you remember back to the drawing that I was doing at the beginning, this is where you're going to add all those extra shadows and details around the tear duct, the bottom of the eyelids here, around the iris itself, and you just build it up layer upon layer, pitting light against dark. Dark will always push things back, and light will always bring things forward. So if you've got that in mind as you're painting, you should really always be able to come out with something that looks pretty decent.
Pretty good so far, huh, kids? And it gets better yet.
So really the principles are all the same no matter what scale you're painting in. It's just you'll be able to do more with each of the techniques the bigger you go. So essentially an eyeball is a sphere, and if you look at the illustration above, you'll see what makes it look three-dimensional. And these are the principles I use to paint an eye. So if you observe the way I'm painting this eye, you will see reflected light, cast shadows, core shadows, highlights, and midtones. What I'm painting now, I guess you would consider a cast shadow, and that would be the shadow that's cast from the eyebrow or the brow bone. And again, these are very thin glazes I'm adding, and it's just all multiple layers built up. And I guess I should say at this point, most of the painting I've been doing on these eyes is acrylic, other than that portion I did earlier in the video.
Nice.
And as the final touch, I'm going to add the catch light, which implies reflected light from where the light source is. On an eye this big, I prefer to add a couple areas that are reflected light. It helps to reinforce the realism of an eye, and it really comes down to just having a larger canvas to paint on. And the bigger the canvas, the more detail you can add. This next step I would really only do on a figure this big. To me it just doesn't look right on a figure smaller than this. Well, that's it for this one, guys. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I enjoyed presenting it to you. Stay tuned, because I have a lot more content just like this coming your way. And as always, I'd appreciate you doing something for me next, and that's to subscribe, hit that bell notification so you never miss an episode, and share this video with someone in this great modeling community of ours. I'm out of here.